the Epistle of Barnabas, it talks about how um, there were 7 days of creation and that they correspond to 7,000 years of the age, which is really an interesting statement because I think going back to Usher's chronology, for example, which again isn't canonical, it really isn't anything, but it's just kind of a commonplace sort of um, um, how should I say timeline that's used to determine when the date of creation was according to biblical logic. And again, what we talk about, the things on the heavenly level, we're talking about things that are following a biblical logic, a kind of a internal logic that you can understand things in terms of symbols and in terms of signs, in terms of images, in terms of basically templates that you could use to kind of unlock things and understand things on a higher level meaning. It's an efficient way of transferring information across an age because the mystery is itself transmitted on two levels, one which is known and one which is unknown, one which is seen and one which is unseen, one which is out in the open, has an earthly level, fleshly level, proximate meaning, but secretly underneath the skin of it, if you will, underneath the surface of it, because the heavenly level meaning is couched in the earthly terms. They're literally inherent in the earthly terms, so that when you speak on the earthly level, you're inherently speaking on the heavenly level. So when you speak about creation, for example, and you end up at the seventh day, if it is as Barnabas alleges that the 7 days amount to 7 years, then the creation story should be carrying with it the surface level meaning should have within it a higher level meaning that corresponds to the age, because you end up on the seventh day, and according to Barnabas, in the higher level understanding, you end up in the seventh millennium, so to speak, in that particular day of rest, which is interesting because that really jives with like what it says in the book of Revelation about there being a millennium, a time of 1,000 years where we live and reign with Christ.
Right.
And as
And
we
it
discussed,
says, sorry to cut you off. I was reading, skimming through Barnabas as we were talking, and also I was looking for Second Esdras, where it talks about the amount of time that has already passed during Ezra's time, when he's speaking about the rain and the mist and how it compares to the times. But in Barnabas 4:3, it says, "The last offense is at hand, concerning which the scripture speaketh, as Enoch saith, for to this end the master hath cut the seasons and the days short, that his beloved might hasten and come to his inheritance." And then it says, Barnabas 4:4, "And the prophet also speaketh on this wise, 10 reigns shall reign upon the earth, and after them shall arise another king who shall bring low 3 of the kings under one." And so you're speaking of Revelation, and then that seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in the spiritual sense. So go ahead, sorry.
oh no, it's very interesting how both he and Jude speak of the prophetic nature of that book. I mean, you have a
Mm-hmm.
witness of it there with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people that I've spoken with, Barnabas was really the turning point in my understanding of how to understand things on a spiritual level. And so I keep returning to this book because Barnabas, I like to think of myself in some regards as Barnabas, not so much as a teacher, but as a student. And
Mm-hmm.
he was somebody who was obviously reading the Didache. He quotes that. He's obviously reading the book of Enoch. He quotes that as scripture, as prophecy, multiple times. He is he's a he obviously has read about the dietary laws in the Epistle of Aristeas, which you can find in the lost books of the Bible and the forgotten books of Eden. All of that stuff he talks about the animals and stuff, he's gotten these things from books. And so he's expositing out of these books. So we kind of are able to look at him as sort of like something we should strive to emulate if we want to have his level of understanding. We need to be reading these books. We need to be taking them on the level of prophecy, and we need to be taking them for what they are. They are vehicles by which a heavenly understanding is revealed in time. So, I mean, and that's what and again, I can't stress this enough. The heavenly level is inherent in the earthly level. In other words, you have the same words, but if the words denote certain things beyond themselves, uh, you have to look for a couple things. They have to be consistent. They have to be across the board. The gospel of truth, for example, goes on and on and on and on and on about the unitary thought, the idea that everything is understood with a unitary understanding. That, in other words, if it's true, it is according to a heavenly language. It is according to the unlocking of keys. Barnabas spends a tremendous amount of time um, explaining, what the dietary laws are, for example, what is coming about. That the days of the wicked one are at hand. He's talking about the falling away, so to speak, of the age. And this was the understanding of the initiates of the early church. And the thing was, and the thing about it is, they understood by means of the Spirit. When by means of the Spirit, of course, as well as their understanding. I mean, you speak of somebody like Apollos, who was mighty in the scriptures, and therefore, because he had that knowledge or whatever, when his spirit came alive due to his understanding of these things, he was a very powerful teacher because he's very primed, to teach, and his insights could stretch, and same thing with Barnabas. And to some extent, we see also in the New Testament, we see Paul quoting out of the life of Adam and Eve. We see Peter quoting out of the story of Ahikar. We see Jude quoting out of the book of Enoch, as well as the Assumption of Moses, or so it is thought. And there are a great many other examples. You see the teachings of Jesus. You see many allusions to things in the book of Enoch. For example, the rich man and Lazarus, for example, when they are in this the place of waiting, when he is in Abraham's bosom, you see that same story about the fountain of water, and all that, the divisions that are made for people, and you see that he's affirming these things. He's affirming the book of Maccabees when he talks about how he's observing the Hanukkah festival, as if to say that miracle did happen. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's attested to in Second or the Maccabees, and also in in Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter of faith, right? It's very interesting how, and this is where I think God has thought everything through in such a way that there's an accuracy to it and a precision to it that is mathematical, that is algebraic, that is a literary masterpiece of the transference of information across an age with such stealth, and with with such an exactitude in terms of the way in which it bypasses the thinking of the carnal mind. And
Right.
so when you make the heavenly level inherent in the fleshly level, if the mind is inherently directed downwards towards the fleshly level, if they're constantly reifying, solidifying, the spiritual into the physical, where they insist on actual days, and when they insist on, when the Bible speaks of a day as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as a day, which is again Barnabas's premise for saying that the seventh day represents the seventh millennium and stuff. But anyway, just to make a short story long,
No, that's
it's kind of just setting the stage for how to think and how to approach these things, because
well, like you had mentioned a moment ago, is I always wondered why Jesus never answered certain questions the way that they were asked, and the way that you put it just now was, or you've put it in your work, but I've heard you say it this way, is that they were asking the wrong question, because so he almost like bypassed their question and went straight to the answer, because they were asking in a fleshly way when they should have asked in a spiritual heavenly way, which seemingly, when he spoke those things to them, it was before, or sometimes seems like it was before the transition where Peter then was like preaching with John. So like before the tomb, where he realized Jesus was out of the tomb, so he had already come back from the dead. So that's his spiritual nature. I know I'm going ahead of myself, but and this might be hard to understand what I'm saying, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. But in Barnabas 8, 8:5, 8:6, and 8:7, it says, Then there is the placing of the wool on the tree. This means that the kingdom of Jesus is on the cross, and that they who set their hope on him shall live forever. And why is there wool and hyssop at the same time? Because in his kingdom there shall be evil and foul days in which we shall be saved. For he who suffers pain in the flesh is healed through the foulness of the hyssop. So talking about, and then in 7, now to us indeed it is manifest. So he's saying to us, we understand these things, but it says that these things so befell for this reason, but to them they were dark, because they heard not the voice of the Lord. So there are certain things that were in a heavenly nature for us to understand, but to them it was dark because they couldn't see the light. So like you teach in the Paul teachings, that there are certain things that have an earthly meaning and a heavenly meaning, and to them it was only earthly. That's what the food laws were. To them was an earthly thing, so they kept the food laws. But to us it's a spiritual thing, just like the Sabbath is a spiritual thing, not a day that we're supposed celebrate or whatever, just in that sense. That, so if that makes sense.
Yeah, the idea of the voice, like what he was just mentioning, the voice, okay, it's when you hear with your spiritual ears. You if you see everything taking place on the level of the flesh, like in other words, everything is at face value. No, you know what I'm saying? It's just stories. It's just fairy tales. I think this is how a lot of unbelievers and a lot of atheists and probably a lot of Christians as well, they take things at face value. They go looking for parables here and there. They go looking for visions here and there. They go looking for interpretations here and there. They know that these literary features exist, but they don't quite get that the whole thing is that. Like, in other words, from the beginning to the end, it's like there's this and then there's this, right? And hearing that voice and lifting up your eyes, like those are the kinds of things that clue us into, the idea that there's a heavenly level meaning.
Oh my goodness, Robert, I apologize to cut you off again, but the verse right after that, I should have read it, because this is what it says, Barnabas 9:1. It's like the answer. Furthermore, he saith concerning the ears, how that it is our heart which he circumcised. The Lord saith to the prophet, with the hearing of the ears they listen to me. And again he saith, they that are afar off shall hear with their ears, and shall perceive what I have done, and be ye circumcised in your hearts, saith the Lord. So it's the fact that you can hear with both ears, that you can hear spiritually, that's the circumcision. And that's what Abraham did in recognition of Christ in the future.
It's happening. You're hearing it. I'm hearing it. The people who understand this language are hearing it. We know in our hearts. We see it with our eyes. We hear it with our spiritual ears. You know what I'm saying? We get it. And the thing, and that's the reassurance, is that everybody understands with the same eyes and the same ears. There is a common language and a commonality. Sometimes they're given keys, and sometimes they're by insight. Barnabas then goes on to explain, talking about, I've gone and explained things up to this point, right? And he said, were I to explain to you about things present or things to come, as if he could explain to us about things present or things to come, he said, you would not understand them. Because the whole time he's up here, he's been expounding parables, right? That's what he's been doing, right? And then he reaches this sort of pivot where he starts talking about the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness and all that. And he transitions into a different kind of teaching. But before he does that, he takes a moment to pause and say, listen, if I were to teach you, up to thus far, I've taught you, sufficiently, I hope. And then he says, but, if I were to speak to you of things present or things to come, right, you would not understand them, because they are put in parables. So in other words, the parables that are spoken by the early Christians are about things then present and things to come. So you keep the mystery from people, the carnally minded, the wicked, right? By clothing them, so to speak, in fleshly terminology, by concealing them. Like in the Gospel of Thomas, it says, woe to the soul that depends upon the flesh, and woe to the flesh that wait. He talks about poverty. Let me start with that. He talks about poverty. What is the poverty? And what is the wealth? Remember, there's this whole duality. It exists in Gnosticism, it exists in Christianity. You know, you're talking about something like that, maybe a matter of degree and not a
Hmm.
matter of kind. In the Bible, it talks about, you know, if the light within you is single, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Um, then, you know, and you can light up the whole world. You know, just because it says something once or twice or three times over here and 15 or 20 times over here doesn't mean that that book really leans in a different direction. It just means that it's expounding on these things, and that
Right.
there are different sources that you can get these same teachings from to a greater extent. And if you have the spiritual eyes to see and you have the spiritual ears to hear, right? Because because he says that if the flesh came into being because of the spirit, in other words, if things were couched in earthly terms for the sake of the preservation, in other words, of that meaning for the eventual re-revelation of that, right?
Hmm.
He said that it is a marvel. But if the spirit came into being because of the flesh, it is a marvel of marvels,
Right.
right? He says,
Hmm.
and yet I am astounded at how this wealth, the spiritual understanding,
Has made its way into this
hits
poverty.
home in this
Yeah.
poverty, which
Yeah.
is the fleshly level. See what I'm
Right.
saying? He's expounding
Yeah.
something about the heavens and the earth. He's expounding about the heavenly and the earthly. And anyway, so I kind of just wanted to touch base with a few of those points before diving into Genesis, because
Well, I know a few. Sorry to interrupt once more, but I know a few people that watch my show and they watch your show, and they've dived into your Paul series, and I
mm,
recommended that because when you learn about Paul, I was just thinking about it this morning on the way to work. Paul teaches that the fact that Paul is a prisoner because he's a spiritual prisoner and has been for the past 2,000 years because people don't understand his teachings. So when he says like Jesus, that's the lower level. When he says Christ, that's the higher level meaning. So if you go back and read all of Paul's work, you can literally just watch it happen. It unfolds just that simply. When he says Jesus Christ, is talking about the earthly couch and the like heavenly things, and it's like back and forth, and you can see him talking about the higher level meaning. And same thing you just talked about with Barnabas is that he's saying, well, I could teach you that stuff now, the stuff that comes in the future, but it's almost like it needs to be preserved. That's why he just went on
yeah,
to something
that's
else.
right.
He went on to something else. So.
That's right. He wanted. I don't like to use the word conceal. I like to use the word
Hmm.
preserve or to
Hmm.
protect or to
Exactly. You're right.
safeguard something.
Hmm.
What literally happened was that the higher level teaching was really only given to certain initiates.
Which it says in
And
Second Esdras, that's what he was commanded to do, was to give it the like you said, the concept of the 24 is a dead concept, because he said this one or whatever, give to, like, there's 24 books you can give to them, but the rest is for the wise. Like the certain ones were for the wise and the unwise alike, but then the rest of it was for the wise only to look at, and that's what he gave to Esdras or whatever. And then you said something to that effect, is that there was the 24 elders that are bowing before the lamb or whatever at the end, that he could read the book, like it has to do with the 24 elders at the end of time. There's all the codes in the Bible, but I won't get into that right now. But
yeah, and in the Gospel of Thomas, it reaffirms the idea of the 24.
hmm.
24, and there's different numerations, but generally when the 24 are spoken of, it has to do with the way in which the Jews categorize their books, and certain
Yeah.
books were put together like Ezra, Nehemiah, and you know what I'm
And he said
saying, the book of
you're
Kings and
speaking
stuff.
of the dead. He said you're speaking of the dead when the living one is in your presence. So what they were talking about was a dead concept, because they were speaking of the 24, but really there's the living
Here's
concept, which
here's the
is.
thing. If anybody wants to get eyes to see and ears to hear, like really fast, like in shorter order, like in 15 minutes. You know what I'm saying? To get spiritual eyes. No, no. There's a couple of things. Number one, there is always the upper and there's the lower, and it's couched in different ways. Because see, look, there is the better and there is the worse. Make a list of things which are the better and make a list of things which are the worse. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, to have knowledge is better than to not have knowledge, right? Uh,
Mhm.
to uh, uh, to to have wealth, spiritual wealth, is better than to have spiritual poverty, so to speak. So when you read something like the Gospel of Thomas, there's a lot of light and there's a lot of darkness all throughout the New Testament and throughout all of the scriptures. I mean, it's ubiquitous. The idea that being of the day is being of the understanding, of being of the spirit, right? To be of the night is to be of the darkness, is to be part of the kingdom of darkness. It's through it just absolutely the scriptures absolutely ooze with that kind of imagery and that kind of teaching. Walk as if you were in the day and not in the night, because we are children of the day and not children of the night. We
Oh,
don't,
wait. Oh,
and then in the
that's what.
associations,
Let me
sleep
read.
and
Let me
dreaming.
read Barnabas 11:4 in that respect. Robert, and again the prophet saith, I will go before thee and level mountains and crush gates of brass, which is what he did in Nicodemus when he went down to the underworld and conquered the underworld, and break in pieces bolts of iron, and I will give thee treasures dark, concealed, unseen, that they may know that I am the Lord God. So these are those things, those teachings they are treasures. That is what the treasures are spoken of, is those spiritual treasures that he has stored up for us in the end times, which Enoch talks about for the elect. So go ahead, sir.
Okay. Hey, can we take a real quick break?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. You want to come back
I
in a minute?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. There's something that just came up. Give me just
Yeah, absolutely. Go
I'll
ahead and
let you
come
know.
right back.
All
No
right,
problem.
thanks.